Firstly, thank you very much for coming again, and thank you to the US-China Institute and the Center for California and the West. And a special thanks also to Clay, Grace, and Jasmine in particular for helping organize this. So the question was, I almost forgot already, but it was about how did I come about making a film about this place.
Well, the place was in the news, and had been,
Right.
and it's an unusual place for a lot of different reasons.
Right.
But you could have, as news cameras did, news cameras went in, shot, the various shots, and noted, the prevalence of the cross and the absence of Chinese flags and things like that in the news coverage. But you went and spent time there and were there during the backlash. But my first question is how you found Annie Liu Hua.
Right. Well, just a little bit of background first before I go into talking about how I found my main character. It was actually around the time I was presenting my first feature documentary, also shot in China, called The Land of Many Palaces, in late 2014. I had a kind of press screening for that, and after the press screening, I had dinner with a friend who said, hey, have you heard about this new cowboy town that they've built 2 hours north of Beijing? And I said, wow, that's fascinating. I haven't heard about that. And I went back to my hotel later that night and couldn't sleep because I was tremendously jet lagged. And typed it into Baidu, and up popped Jackson Hole. And I had a day off when I didn't have any screenings, and I called my friend, who later became a producer on the project. Hey, can we rent a car and go up together? So we ended up driving up there and persuading 2 security guards to let us in. It was actually really, really hard to find the place. Initially, I found the website for the developer, who actually have towns all around China. And anyway, eventually we found the place, persuaded these security guards to let us in, and they gave us 30 minutes and max, and then they would come and find us, right? Amazingly, in those 30 minutes, we encountered the founder and figurehead of the town, who you saw in the film, and he invited us to...
Liu Shangyang.
Yeah, he invited us to actually stay for 2 nights, which we agreed to. And during those 2 days, 2 nights, I just spent all the time with the producer, interviewing people, talking to real estate agents. We followed a real estate agent around the whole town. And it was at that time that Quincy, the real estate character you see in the film, introduced us to our main character, Annie. And I think in Annie, we talked to a lot of prospective buyers and current residents of the town. There are really varied reasons why people live there. Some people simply want to escape the pollution in downtown Beijing. Other people want a house and a yard. Quite simple reasons in a way, but I felt in her we saw a person who had other ideas. Yes, she wanted a house and a yard. Yes, she wanted to escape the pollution. But in this place, she was seeking a solution to her unhappiness living in Beijing. And in a way, a second chance at living in the United States, because her husband didn't want to move there with her. Originally, she had this plan that she would emigrate to the US, but he wasn't on board. So in a way, this was her plan B. And in the American dream, or in American life, she saw many of the things that she wanted that were lacking in her life. And some of these things were quite abstract ideas that are hard to define, such as happiness, freedom, romance, and other ideas too.
No, this film takes us into so many questions that loom large in Chinese society today. We certainly, of course, encounter religion. We also encounter tension between homeowners and property developers, and organizing and making demands and doing those kinds of things, something that looms large in China. And so there's a lot of these different kinds of things. We also see some of the downturn and this sort of thing. Now, when you're filming this, there are a lot of Chinese coming and buying property in Jackson Hole in Wyoming, right? In 2014, 2015, 2016, 28 to 30 billion dollars worth of American homes are purchased by Chinese buyers, right? So this American ideal, and you've captured that, and Annie is special perhaps in her embrace of these things with the clothes she wears, how she decorates, her fast food recipes, and all of these kinds of things. Her unhappiness is so profound and quite unresolved at the end of the film. Can you say something more about her and it?
Right. Well, this is one of the reasons that she interested me and the producers I was working with, because I think as well as Chinese culture that I feel very connected to, I've been going since I was young. I also feel very connected to the United States, to which I studied here at college, and I now live here. Been going since I was young too. And I was always interested in this idea of the pursuit of happiness in the US, and that Americans are still very attached to, that I don't think we have necessarily in Great Britain or Western Europe, where I think maybe British people tend to be more dour in some ways and take pleasure in maybe sadness, and a lot of our pop music like Adele and Sam Smith and what have you is about sadness, right, and brings you to tears.
Even royalty.
Yeah, exactly. So this idea of the pursuit of happiness is fascinating, and how it's translated over to China. And around the time I was starting this project, the Chinese dream had really taken off. And there was this whole debate, well, to what extent is it tied to the American dream and pursuing self-interest and pursuing happiness, and some of these perhaps American ideals that are translated over. So in Annie, I saw really, just like most people, most compelling protagonists in a fiction film or in a documentary, that life is deeply tragic. There are many things that are inherently tragic about it. And yet there's this desire and belief that happiness is possible against all odds. And I think that's what she hoped the town would deliver. So in a way, it's a money can't buy happiness story. And I think she knows that deep down too. I think she was a very intelligent person. So I think she was buying into the fantasy of it more than really thinking it could deliver everything she wanted, if that makes sense.
Yeah, even the film within a film, right? The story that she and a couple of her neighbors and the personal trainer produce is about, some dream that, none of them have, but all of them want the end result.
Right. That was one of the interesting things about many of the clubs that they offer in Jackson Hole and the events. They were very, very cinematic, and I think a lot of Jackson Hole and the way it's built, the way the clubs are organized, the kinds of things they're teaching in the clubs, are things that they've drawn out of Hollywood cinema, much of it conceived here at USC, if any of you are film students here. And, the movie club in particular, which is one of the largest clubs in Jackson Hole, where they basically draft screenplays and kind of script themselves into these mini movies that they create, and then they project them back to the community once a month in the spring and the summer and the autumn. It's too cold in the winter to have outdoor screenings. But I thought that was just so fascinating that they, creating these mini movies about their ideal life in the town, even if they can't have their ideal life in reality, at least they can create these kind of mini movies and project them back to the community for entertainment value. Yeah.
The film that they showed to inspire the real estate agents.
American Beauty.
This is not. We actually do have films that do that sort of thing, but this is, of course, mocking it. And did they get the satire of it?
That's a good question. I don't know. That's sort of another example, I suppose, of the how embedded cinematic representations of American life are in the town, and they're taken as real in a way. Well, I think they know that they're fictionalized, but fiction is always somewhat better than reality, perhaps. And I found that deeply fascinating, and I haven't quite unpacked what it means to show a fictionalized movie like that, Annette Bening playing a real estate agent, and them using it as a training video for real estate agents on how to sell houses in Beverly Hills. It's just too complex in a way to unpack. Maybe Clay can help unpack it.
Not a chance. But no, I think this is fascinating because Annie had lived in the United States, speaks English, has become a Christian. She's embraced so much of this.
Yeah.
But one gets the sense that she's unusual, even in Jackson Hole, China.
Absolutely, yeah. I wouldn't say she's representative of probably most people in the town. She's one of the most enthusiastic about embracing the American elements of the town. And I would say some of the things that she's adopted, other people are suspicious about. Or if you may have noticed that the congregation in the church was very small. It was probably at most 25 people. And the fewest I saw in there on a Sunday, during the winter anyway, when there are less people there, was probably about 10. So Christianity hasn't taken off despite their attempts to spread the gospel. And at one of the points during the filming process, the priest was facing kind of the axe. He was. They sort of said, well, if you don't build up the congregation and if there isn't more money coming in, then you may have to leave and we may have to shut down the church. So I think he was really encouraging at one point for people to go out and spread the gospel and recruit people to come in. And I think other elements too that hadn't really taken off was American food. They had an American food store where you could buy Fruit Loops and Jell-O and Hershey's and all sorts of other things, and it wasn't particularly successful. I think on the 4th of July, maybe people embrace these things, but the rest of the year, they're really cooking and eating Chinese food. And the American restaurant, the steakhouse they originally had, shut down, and it was replaced by a dumpling restaurant. Yeah,
as well it should be. That's a personal preference, but we see the resort life, right? We see the golf course, we see that sort of thing. We see some of the entertainment. The placement of the church at the center, at this community center, I'm wondering how that fit in with the backlash. So at the end of the film, you bring in the fact that other Chinese have discovered this. And of course, there's also been proclamations by the Chinese leadership against weird architecture. I don't know if this qualifies as weird, but foreign names for developments. There's a Yosemite development outside of Beijing. There's these kinds of things. And I was wondering if you could say something more. And after Adam goes through that, it'll be time for your questions, okay?
Sure. So the church, I think, was intended as a kind of focal point in the community, and it's used for much more than just the Sunday for Sunday worship. It's used for weddings. They actually hire it out for external weddings for people who
It's
don't
probably
live in
popular
Jackson
for
Hole.
that.
Absolutely. So almost every day when we were filming, there would be some kind of photo shoot going on at the church, or a wedding ceremony. It was hired out for events and various things. So it was a very active space outside of Sunday worship. The backlash was actually interesting. So around the time the New York Times released their article, it was sort of a little bit stalled, because anything that's published by the New York Times in China, as you know, is usually republished by state media, or they comment on it, or it kind of goes viral in the
Well,
country.
the Times actually has its own Chinese website.
Yeah.
And so this article appeared in Chinese, but the New York Times has been blocked for a long time, and so access is on and off.
Right. So so I think the state media learnt about Jackson Hole from the New York Times article that had been republished across China, and it was even provincial newspapers and cities and towns were writing about it too. And there was a very big backlash. There were, deemed as, in some extreme cases, as traitors to China, and the comments that people left online were quite savage. So at that point, the leadership of Jackson Hole decided to tone down the American elements of the town, encourage people to integrate more traditionally Chinese characteristics in their gardens and homes. That's, of course, my main character Annie didn't like very much, because it wasn't in keeping, she felt. And what else did they do? They did shut down the church for a couple of months. I think that's why it was quite messy. I think you saw in one of the last scenes there were trash bags and it hadn't been cleaned for a while. So they did shut down the church for a couple of months, and a few of the other spaces were kind of closed down for a while. There was a conference that was cancelled, and they kind of kept low key for a couple of months, and then things picked up later. Yeah.
And I assume that the building that some of the owners were complaining about, these may be resort hotels or something that are going up, or are those just condominiums that are being erected?
Right. It's amazing what has been built since I finished recording this film. So the last shoot was in, I think it was early 2017. And since then, because I'm still part of the WeChat groups, a lot of producing for projects in China takes place on WeChat. And basically, I was a member of all of these groups. The cooking club, the housekeeping club, the golf club, everything. And so I got thousands of messages every day, trying to keep up to date with what was going on. And I'm still in those groups, so I still get updates. And they share pictures in them. And they're sharing photos of a lot of the recent developments. And the town has expanded quite a bit. They've been building these kind of condo buildings, apartment blocks. I think there's a new hotel that they've built. They're now expanding access to people who want to buy timeshares, not just permanent residences, buying a house, but buying a timeshare for a couple of weeks a year. And this has made a lot of people in the town quite unhappy, because the views they were purchasing, some of the properties, the way they're situated, their views are now blocked by these condo buildings. Yeah.
So their American dream has become more of a Chinese one. Okay.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, your questions. We've got several. Craig is going to go around. So let's get maybe 3 questions and let Adam have his way with them. We'll go here. These three gentlemen right here.
Hi, my name is Cristiano, and
Hi.
thank you for coming first. I just have a question regarding her husband, because like from her description, like her husband is not very like in line with like any of her ideas. So how did you manage to get the husband in the film?
Yeah, let's maybe get three questions and then we'll let Adam respond.
Hi, my name is Josefa. First of all, it was a wonderful film. My question was that during the film, we saw two sides of sort of cultural appropriation. In that, first, the protagonist, she complains that there's Chinese sites being built or buildings being built in the American community. And another arc or like a little miniature story was that the biker gang were really angry that there were checkpoints at their road. I was just wondering if that's like symptomatic of a broader issue in China or something that China is facing currently.
Yeah, I'm not sure that gang quite captures it, but we'll go with that.
All right. Thank you for your movie at first, and then so one of the business models I see, especially with this development, is like it benefits from the high how to say income from the Beijing city, and it has this venture for those people who have this demand. So, what is your view or thoughts on this kind of business model as you discovered it? Thank you.
Thank
So
you.
the husband, cultural appropriation, and does this work business wise?
Got it. Thank you for the question. So to answer the question about the husband, so he was absent for much of the time that I was recording with Annie. So I'd been following Annie for about a year and a half on and off. Initially, I was there for 3 months, summer 2015, and I was with her a lot. She was basically my neighbor. I rented a house in this town. I was in the Aspen cul-de-sac, and she was in the Park City cul-de-sac. So I would walk over to her house on a morning, and you know, as you know, schedules always change. So you have to turn up on a morning and see what people are doing. And I only really encountered the husband probably twice during that whole summer. She was there alone most of the time, and occasionally she would invite her colleagues and a couple of friends to visit. The first time I encountered him, I felt there was something very off in their relationship, and I didn't pry too much. It was sort of a sensitive subject for her because the way she talked about her husband, she sort of glorified him in conversation when he was absent. And then when they were together in person, they had a really awkward relationship, and he just didn't seem particularly interested in her and what she was trying to achieve in the town. And they just weren't on the same page with regard to, pursuing the American way of life or whatever it was that she wanted in the town, including the Christian aspects and the cooking and everything else. The second time I met him was the time I believe we actually filmed, and that was many, many weeks later, or if not months later. And as you saw, it was a really kind of difficult thing to film. I'm kind of amazed he allowed me to film. When I went into the house that night, there was a very kind of awful atmosphere, and she was very off, which was kind of the first, which represented really the other time that the first time that I saw them together. A very weird atmosphere. But it was important for me to capture that in the film because it's a big part of her life and her story, the relationship with her husband, and I think how she imagines married life in her head, and this sort of Hollywood, again, a Hollywood version of coupledom that she was imagining but was so distant from her everyday experience of marriage. But they're still together as far as I know. I check in with her frequently, and they're still together, but they don't see each other very much. He's away on business trips much of the time. He's sort of a high-flying lawyer in China, and he's dealing with, I don't know if I'm allowed to say, but very high-level kind of secretive corruption cases with the central government, and he has to go off to, since the anti-corruption crackdown across China, he has to go off to these provincial capitals across the country and spend a lot of time there in court. So,
By a show, we have two more questions just from that. But by a show of hands, how many of you expected the marriage to be over at the end of the film? Okay. Yes. The second question about cultural appropriation.
Cultural appropriation. So this is perhaps something I should have asked about more while I was there. I think cultural appropriation is something that's only really discussed in the way that you frame the question in the United States. I think there's less of a conversation about this in the United Kingdom, and I don't know if Chinese people talk about this much. I think there's more of there's more freedom in their picking and choosing what elements of other cultures to, I suppose, appropriate. Perhaps Clay has
one example of that, and I've forgotten the details on it, but an American teenager chose to wear a qipao, and that blew up in the United States among especially Chinese Americans, but Asian Americans more generally. What are you doing? And in China, there was this opposite reaction of, well, one for us. They like, this aspect of our culture. And so, yeah, it's a fraught field.
I don't see it so negatively, actually. I'm fascinated by these replica towns in China, and I think they're kind of wonderful in a way. I went to the British replica town, Thames Town, on the outskirts of Shanghai, and I spent some time there last summer, and I thought it was wonderful. I was like, well, if these people, feel the need to live in British-style homes and kind of embed their Chinese culture into it, and it's fascinating to me, and I don't necessarily have a problem with it in the context of China. I think it's I suppose you could talk about problematic elements, but in a way I think it's kind of wonderful and fascinating, curious.
No, I think there's people can choose to live however they choose to live. The question is this a money-making thing? Does this work better than other, suburban developments? And if so, why?
It's a good question. The founder and figurehead of the town, I was kind of in awe of. I think he's a very intelligent man. He's from Henan province, and I don't know if anyone is from Beijing in here, but people from Henan really struggle in Beijing and in working their way up, right, into a position like this where he's building towns and selling houses to local people. So I think he's worked very, very hard, and he's kind of obviously had to overcome discrimination against people from his province. And I think he had learned from other replica suburban kind of developments in China. I've been fascinated them since like 2006, 2007, when I was in Guangdong province, where there are so many of these places. There's a replica of Hallstatt, Austria, and countless others on the outskirts of Shenzhen and other cities. But a lot of them, weren't replicated very well. The attention to detail isn't there. A lot of them are usually too far from the downtown areas to actually persuade people to live out there and then commute to their jobs. But the founder and figurehead of Jackson Hole, I think, was very, very smart. He looked at all of these other projects, figured out what was wrong with them, and then figured out ways to kind of make the isolation of the town, how distant it was from Beijing, as a selling point. He was saying, this is very far. It's a 2.5 hour commute, but you can be far from the sources of pollution. There's less pollution up here, and here you can truly escape from the nightmares of urban life. And the second thing he did that was very, very smart was he hired a lady called Alison Smith, who I believe is based up in Portland, Oregon, to consult on the project and help design some of the homes and the layout and source the materials from the United States. So most of the materials that are featured in the houses, the wood and the furnishings and even some of the planting, is all sourced from the United States, was shipped over and then assembled on the site that the founder of the town purchased. So I think he's very smart from learning from the mistakes other developers had made, and then on top of that, finding a business model that would work. And I think he's done that in multiple ways. Another smart thing that he did was that after the first town, Jackson Hole, Beverly Hills is kind of separate, and the Swiss town is separate too. After Jackson Hole was complete, he closed the development company that built the town, financed the town, closed it, and then reopened the company as a lifestyle company under a different sort of legal setup, and basically went about selling lifestyle packages or membership packages to the inhabitants of the town. So I don't know if this is correct, but a lot of the people in the town, the people living there, thought this was kind of a savvy way to avoid any disputes over construction quality, any issues that they had to do with what they had purchased, the property or the house itself or anything else, because they had reinvented the company as a lifestyle company under a different legal format. And we're now selling all of these lifestyle packages that now include timeshares, and it includes like a cosmetic brand, and I think they now have like a clothing line and several other companies situated within this lifestyle company. Yeah.
It's a common practice among developers here to do that kind of thing, in the sense of, before the lawsuits start, we'll close this company and start another one. And so that may have been one of the other things they picked up. And as a management company, they're able to do more things. Let's go for just one or two more questions, and then we'll have to wrap things up. We've got hands up on this side. Craig, could we maybe just come down and get these three questions? In the interest of diversity.
Hi, thank you so much for the film. I really enjoyed it. My name is Skylar. Could you elaborate a little bit more on, I really like the scene where Annie was speaking to her coworker who was kind of saying, this is hopeless, this makes no sense. What did Annie's coworkers from Beijing, not living in Jackson Hole, think of the whole arrangement?
Great question. Let's come over here and get one of these gentlemen here.
Hi, thanks for coming. My name is Ethan. I'm just curious, as a fellow filmmaker, as a documentarian yourself, what was the most challenging part of the film to capture or to portray?
Thank you.
This gentleman right here. We'll get 4 questions. You'll get to ask.
Hi, my name's Steve. I really enjoyed the film. But I'm curious about, you have a lot of shots of some of the laborers and people who work at Jackson Hole beautifying the place, whatever the case may be. I'm curious if you could speak on their experiences, who they were, how you filmed them, why you chose to film them, and so on.
Yeah, and there were people living here before Annie, right? So you had displaced farmers and things like that. So this gentleman, this will be our final question.
Hi, thank you. My name is Thomas. Thank you again for coming and driving all this way. So my question is, of all places, why Jackson Hole, Wyoming? I think most Americans around the country, if you say Jackson Hole, they don't know where it is. So, and like, if to economists, Jackson Hole's kind of like the holy grail for central bankers and outdoorsmen. But do you know why? Did you get any insight as to why specifically Jackson Hole, as opposed to any other American town in the countryside?
Okay, thanks for
Great.
the questions. Thank you. So the first one was about how did Annie's co-workers feel about her moving to this town and what she was trying to achieve there. I spent sort of limited time around her co-workers, but I did. But she worked for quite a high-profile law firm in Beijing. They gave me kind of limited access to their space, but I did spend a few hours there, and I hung out with them at lunch occasionally, as you saw at the Friends Cafe that was very, very near her workplace, kind of in the central business district in Beijing. They were really curious too. I think some of them had been to the United States before, and others hadn't, but perhaps wanted to. And I think they were very, very curious to visit. I think the friend that you saw in that scene, where there was a conversation about Christianity, right? I forget her name, but it was in the credits. But I believe she had lived in the US too, and I think she was married to an American journalist, actually, and they had recently moved back to Beijing. So she was very clued in with Christianity, and perhaps had experienced it in the United States, and just was kind of a critical thinker, I think. Maybe had been educated in the US too, and I don't know in that scene if she was playing up to the camera or something, because after she left, Annie was like, "Oh, we don't normally have arguments like that," but she made some very valid points, I think, and Christianity operates in a very strange way in China. I still haven't quite figured out how it really works there, because it's sort of underground, but not really. There are a lot of Christians, and I believe it's growing, especially in rural areas, I've noticed. But that was a good scene to get, because there was kind of a critical element to it that I think made her reconsider or rethink how dedicated she really was to the church in Jackson Hole.
Ethan's question.
Ethan's question was, can you remind me?
I was really hoping you remembered. Ethan, shout it out, would you?
Yeah.
Were most challenging, yeah.
I think the most challenging thing day to day was issues to do with scheduling and following multiple characters. As I mentioned, I lived in Jackson Hole. I rented a house there for 3 months, and then when I went back for shorter shoots, for 2-week shoots, and eventually like weekend shoots. So usually documentaries work that way. You have to be there for a long period of time, and then increasingly, kind of shorter and shorter trips as you become more focused on what you're recording, and your stories kind of narrow in a way. So it was easier later on, but initially that first summer when I was there, it was a long process of building up trust with people, having dinner, like breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Every meal was basically me going to have a big dinner or big lunch or big breakfast with someone. I never ate alone. I was basically going to eat with people in order to get kind of leads for stories and meet as many people as possible. And you know how things work in China. You have to eat with people in order to kind of get anywhere. So a lot of the first few weeks were just really eating. I've never eaten so much in my whole life. And my first project, The Land of Many Palaces, I had to basically take up smoking and drinking baijiu, and wrecked my health.
The sacrifices people make.
Right, but you have to do that. Yeah, you have to do whatever it takes to get your film made. And with this one, it was just weeks and weeks of having meals with people in order to build up trust and get to know people, and then make them feel comfortable with me being around with their camera and a person recording sound and what have you. But I would say later on, once I did start filming, scheduling was hard, following multiple characters, and schedules are changeable, and I was going back and forth. I was filming in Beijing, and I didn't have a car, so I was kind of reliant on this prospective resident bus. So it's people they bus back and forth who are interested in purchasing properties there. And I basically took this bus from their sales center in Beijing. It's actually near the Beijing Film Academy, which was useful because I had a few friends there and an intern at one point. Yeah, so
have the people of Jackson Hole seen this film?
they've seen parts of it. They have seen an almost complete version, and I'm sending the full film to them basically at the end of the week. But they've seen like a rough cut and snippets along the way. And I've gotten some useful feedback from them because I kind of want it to be, not just my point of view, but there were Chinese producers. I had advisors on this project who are Chinese and non-Chinese, and then people in the town have given feedback as well. So it's been kind of a group effort in a way.
Yeah, I'll be curious what the neighborhood committee has to say. They were out canvassing. Steve had a question about the people.
So I had some limitations on what I could record there. As I mentioned earlier, initially I spent 2 nights there from this invitation that the founder gave to me, and I returned to the UK, and then I was in the US kind of promoting my first feature documentary here, and I couldn't get this place out of my head. I was like, there has to be a feature documentary about this. This is kind of my next project. And I wrote a really lovely letter to Mr. Liu and tried to email it to him, but his email was like wrong and it bounced back. And I was like, okay, I got to find him on WeChat, which I did. And I sent it to him on WeChat, and he messaged me back saying, so I pitched to him that I wanted to make a feature film and that he would let me live in the town for initially a few months, which later became a series of other trips. And he agreed to it. However, when I arrived back there to shoot the film in early summer 2015, I sat down with the promotions guy at the lifestyle company, and they...
Is that the fellow who's seen later in conversation with Mr. Liu?
Yes, he's he was one of the members of the lifestyle company, one of the people working for them, and we sat down together and I explained the kinds of stories I might be interested in, and they said, okay, you can follow residents, you can follow real estate agents. I had very limited choices over the real estate agent potential characters. They gave me Quincy, but she was the top-selling real estate agent, right? They didn't want me to film with people who weren't very good at selling houses. But I sort of had free reign on who I could choose resident-wise to be in the film. And then Mr. Liu, the founder, agreed to be in the film too. He was sort of picky and choosy about what scenes I could film with him. But the other people working in the town, the laborers, the construction workers, local farmers who sort of are groundspeople, they mow the lawns and they prune the bushes and prune the trees and what have you, and water everything. There's kind of an army of those people. It was amazing how many of those people kind of come into the town in the morning and then leave in the evening. They were sort of saying to me, well, you don't need to record these people, right? And it was fine because my idea was to follow a resident and a real estate agent and Mr. Liu, but it would have been nice to have spent more time with those other people. But I had to be very careful because I ran the risk of being thrown out. I mean, it's a gated community. If I followed stories that they deemed sensitive, I didn't want that to be the end of my feature documentary. And of course, most feature documentaries, they start, but they're rarely completed. You know, a small percentage of films are completed.
Yeah, so there's a real estate, or there's a development that I'm familiar with, and people lived there. Their land was transferred, the control of it, from those villages to the development company under the auspices of the government. So that part of the story we don't know, or at least we don't get from the film. And in the one development that I'm particularly familiar with, the groundskeepers, a lot of those people used to farm this land. They used to be there doing that sort of thing. What happens, next is anybody's guess on some of those things. And here we have the big question about why choose Jackson Hole? If you're not involved in central government finance and looking at the way the bond market's going to go, many people don't know Jackson Hole. Why did they choose Jackson Hole?
Yeah, it's a question that I asked again and again, and it was so hard to get to the bottom of, to get to the reason why they specifically picked this location in the American West, because there are tons of these towns similar to Jackson Hole. They could have picked Aspen, Colorado, or Sun Valley, or Lake Tahoe, or something along those lines. It's a curious thing in the Chinese tourism industry, because I would occasionally walk into these places, places that were selling tours, right, for Chinese people to go abroad to Europe, to go to the United States and Canada, and go on these like 10-day tours where they would stop at several locations, right? And I encountered some recently in Hallstatt, Austria, the original Hallstatt, Austria, which is a very random town that Austrians don't really understand. Why do so many Chinese tourists visit this town? And I was there, and there were hardly any Austrian people there. It was inundated with tour groups from China who had been given like half an hour. They were in Vienna in the morning, got on a bus, 3-4 hour bus to Hallstatt, had 30 minutes in Hallstatt to take their photos, and then they were off to Berlin or wherever they might be going. And nobody in Hallstatt could answer why, and the Chinese people there couldn't answer why Hallstatt had become so like implanted in the Chinese consciousness, right? And I think Jackson Hole is one of those places too. It's just, I've been to the original Jackson Hole. I filmed the epilogue there, and again, there were so many Chinese tourists there, and nobody could answer why this place was so famous in China. This very specific place. Maybe because of the placement of the mountains in relation to the river, feng shui principles, something along those lines. But that isn't really maybe a strong enough reason, because...
Well, I think, because of tourism, Yellowstone looms very large for visitors to the United States. And Yellowstone is one of the national parks where if you go to the visitor center, they have Chinese language guides to different kinds of things. And so, maybe that's part of it, but also, if you're marketing, you've got to have something different, something new. And they pushed really hard on this freedom of the frontier theme in this gated, manicured community.
Right. I'm actually screening the film in the original Jackson Hole next week, and I'm so looking forward to this screening, because they were desperate to screen the film because they don't understand why in the last 10 years there's been such a massive influx of tourists from China. it's great for their town because they have all of this income from tourism, and the price of hotel rooms have shot up. All the restaurants are expensive now, and so they're earning a lot of money from this boost in tourism, but they don't understand. And this was one of the first questions the programmer at the Jackson Hole Center for the Arts asked me was, we want to screen your film because we don't understand why our town is so popular with Chinese tourists, and we want to gain a better sense of why, so we can be better prepared to receive this enormous influx of tourists in the future. And it's only set to grow, the projected numbers.
Yeah, taking Americaville to Americaville. It's quite the adventure. I know we have some additional questions. I'm going to have to beg you to hold off simply because we've long overstayed our welcome in this space. And we need to say thank you to Adam. This film is going to be screened at other venues, University of California, Irvine, UCLA, right? And I think I had that right. And, I know I'm mentioning the foes, the opponents. But tell your friends. Tell your friends to go and see this film. You've got classmates, you've got friends. Let them know about it. And right now, I hope you'll let Adam know how much you've appreciated the fact that he created this film and that he shared it with us and come here to be with us today.
Thank you for coming, everyone. I appreciate it. Thank you.
One more question. Hang on. You can ask it directly, but it is our great... Oh, you live there? Okay, so as a resident of Jackson Hole, are you still? Your family is still there? I don't know if everybody heard, but we have a denizen of Jackson Hole, China. Please go ahead. She's speaking out in defense.
So the first thing is about the weather pollution. Recent years, the government really made a lot effort in air pollution. So recently, I would say there's only maybe 5 days out of a whole year there's gonna be air pollution, and other days gonna be pretty fun. And for the pavilion thing, that's actually my neighbors. So I was And also for the farmers thing.
Do you like the addition of the pavilion?
Of course, my neighbors are very nice guys, yeah. And for the farmers thing, I know there's actually kind of a fight when they want to construct the whole town there, because the local people there believe there's a god or protector for every mountain. So when they need to build the whole town, they need to break into the mountain. So there's definitely some conflicts between the local people and the company, I guess. And the reason why, just to add up why the Mr. Liu is such a intelligent people in doing business is because about the Swiss town, is because in 2022 the Winter Olympics is gonna be held right, I think it's only 30 minutes driving,
closer to Zhangjiakou. Yeah.
Yes, only 30 minutes driving away from the actual Olympic site. And another thing, I will say the last thing I really want to stress is about the housewife ideal life. Because I really want to say feminism is really getting more and more attention in China. So I really want the audience to know please be hopeful and have this kind of positive idea for China. Yeah, because I do think it's gonna be better. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I suspect Annie's an outlier in a lot of different ways. But on behalf of the Center for East Asian Studies, on behalf of the U.S.-China Institute, in these waning days of the Year of the Pig, we want to give Adam the Year of the Pig mug. Thank you.